Hey, welcome to Audio Listeners. We're all about breaking down the best ideas from great books.
Want to learn from all those amazing books out there, but you just can't find the time?
That's exactly what we do. We pull the key ideas from the best books on growth and motivation.
So you can boost your personal growth, gain powerful knowledge, and find that daily motivation for free.
Here's the cool part. Every book is a complete playlist, so you can learn from start to finish.
So go check out the playlist section. You're going to find something that helps for sure.
And hey, if you like what we're doing, do us a favor and hit that like button.
You're not going to want to miss what's next, so make sure you subscribe for the latest books.
And one last thing, what book should we cover next? Let us know right down in the comments.
All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive strategy from the Art of Seduction, but we're not looking at this as a how-to guide. Instead, think of it as a deep dive into power dynamics, a method that just completely flips the script on what it means to be the pursuer. Let's get right into it.
So right at the heart of this entire strategy is this one powerful, paradoxical idea. The whole game is built on making your target believe that they're the one in control, that they're the one doing the chasing. It's an illusion, and that's exactly what we're going to break down today.
So, you might be asking, why do you even need a strategy like this? Why the retreat? Well, it's basically a solution to a really common problem, getting stuck as the constant aggressor. Always being the one pushing, which over time just doesn't work as well, and you end up losing your power.
And this right here, this is what I think is so brilliant. It's all about the energy exchange. See, when you're always the aggressor, the other person can just sit back and be passive. They don't have to put any energy in. The tension just goes flat. But if you retreat, you create a void. And that void forces them to step forward, to invest their energy. And that's what cranks the tension way, way up.
Okay, so this brings us to the actual mechanics of it. How do you pull this off? Well, the goal isn't to just leave. It's about strategically creating distance. It's an art form, really, creating just enough space to make the other person desperate to close it.
And here are the moves, according to the source material. It starts small, a touch of aloofness. Then you escalate it to something more deliberate, like suddenly not showing up when you're expected. From there, you might drop a hint of boredom, or maybe even let them see you seem interested in someone else. You see the pattern here, right? It's all these small, calculated moves designed to make them feel just a little bit insecure.
And here's the absolute key. You do all of this without a single word of explanation. The real power isn't in what you're doing, it's in the doubt you're creating. You're planting this tiny seed of uncertainty and then just letting their own imagination run wild, blowing it up into anxiety and, well, desire.
So what happens when all these little seeds of doubt start to sprout? Well, if you've played your cards right, the outcome is a total reversal of the roles. The tables completely turn. The person who was being chased suddenly becomes the one doing the chasing.
And this is the psychological trigger you're aiming for. Your target, now feeling this fear of losing you, starts to act. They actively start to pursue you, driven by this new need to own you, to get rid of all that uncertainty you created and feel secure again.
All right, so the whole dynamic has flipped. The target is now actively coming after you. This is what sets the stage for what the source material calls the final phase, moving in for the physical seduction.
But it helps to see where this fits into the bigger picture. The source breaks it down into a three-part process. First, you have the mental seduction. That's about getting inside their head. Second, the emotional seduction, which is all about confusing them, stirring things up. Our retreat strategy is a huge part of this. And all of that leads right here to the third and final stage, the physical seduction.
And here's the final playbook. What's so interesting is that even now, at the very end, the strategy says to show a little bit of coldness, just to spark one last wave of panic. Then, you lure them in with signals you know they can't resist. And finally, you make your move when their desire is at its absolute peak, but in a way they don't see coming. It's all about that perfect calculated timing.
But the strategy doesn't just stop there. The source is pretty clear that once the physical goal is met, things can get tricky. Disenchantment is a real risk. So, managing what happens after is just as critical as the seduction itself.
Which, of course, begs the question, the game is won. Now what? According to this strategy, you're at a major fork in the road, and you've got a decision to make. And the source material lays out two very different options.
Path 1, if you want a relationship, you have to reseduce them over and over, constantly creating and releasing that tension to keep the spark alive. Path 2, if the conquest was the only goal, then the victim is sacrificed. That means a swift, clean break so you can move on.
So all of this brings us right back where we started, to the fundamental principle that makes this entire complicated dance actually work: the power of illusion.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it?
The whole thing, the retreat, the doubt, the final move, it's all engineered to make the target feel like every single step was their idea. They're convinced they're acting on their own free will, that they fell into your arms simply because they wanted to.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. In this whole game of desire, where does the real power lie? Is it in the act of chasing someone down, or is the ultimate power in skillfully setting the stage so that you become the one who is being chased? That's the strategic question at the very heart of all this.
All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating idea from our source material: the power of physical lures. We're going to look at how some of history's most notorious seducers used the body, not the mind, to completely captivate their targets. So let's kick things off with a question that honestly feels like it was written for right now. In a world with endless notifications, infinite scrolling, just constant distractions, how do you actually get someone to put down their phone, tune out all that noise, and focus entirely on you? Well, the source material we're looking at has a pretty radical answer. It argues that true captivation isn't about winning some big debate or impressing someone with your intellect. No, the real strategy is to completely bypass their guarded analytical mind and instead awaken their dormant senses. It's all about shifting someone's entire focus from thinking to feeling. Okay, so to really see what this looks like in the real world, let's jump into our first case study. I want you to meet La Belle Otero, a woman who was the absolute embodiment of the hot approach. Her entire strategy? It was built on radiating this overwhelming, almost dangerous heat. I mean, just look at this breakdown of who she was. She wasn't just beautiful, she projected this raw, animalistic energy. Her dancing was literally described as writhing like an animal in heat, and her effect on some of the most powerful men of her time was absolutely devastating. We're talking financial ruin and in some cases, even suicide. And get this quote from the New York Times, it just nails her power. They didn't just say she was a good dancer. They used words like serpent and writhing, painting this picture of something mesmerizing, primal, and yeah, almost a little dangerous. But here's where the real genius of her technique kicks in. It wasn't just about being overtly sexual for everyone to see. It was about making that intense energy feel personalized. She radiated this inner fire that made each man believe that he was the one igniting her passion. It was a total illusion, right? It made him feel powerful, like he was in control, even while he was being completely mesmerized. And yeah, Maurice Chevalier, he just sums it all up, doesn't he? There was absolutely nothing subtle about the effect she had. Her presence was just an overwhelming physical force. Okay, so now let's do a complete 180. If Otero was all about overwhelming heat, our next case study, the actor Errol Flynn, was the absolute master of projecting an irresistible coolness and nonchalant charm. And the contrast here is just, wow, it's striking. Otero overwhelmed the senses with this contagious heat. Flynn, on the other hand, got to the same goal by creating a sense of contagious ease. One turns up the temperature, the other lowers inhibitions. But here's the thing, you gotta notice. They both land in the exact same spot, a state where the body takes over from the mind. So with Flynn, his whole method was about creating this space that was just free of judgment. His grace and his confidence were totally infectious. The source material really emphasizes that he offered an escape, not just to a new place, but an escape from all the rules and worries of everyday life. And by focusing purely on a woman's physical presence, he had this strange, paradoxical effect of making her feel completely and utterly accepted. And you can see this pattern pop up again and again, whether it was a seriously dangerous swim in a crocodile-infested river or a daring jump from one balcony to another in Acapulco. Flynn was constantly manufacturing these moments of physical adventure. He created these scenarios where his target had to let go of their inhibitions and just be in the present moment with him. And here it is, straight from the man himself. This quote just lays his whole philosophy out on the table. For Flynn, seduction was all about bypassing the mind completely. It was a purely physical experience, and he believed a woman's intellect would only, in his words, get in the way. So you've got this intense heat from Otero and this effortless cool from Flynn. You're probably thinking, how do these two totally opposite things connect? Well, the source argues they're both designed to do one thing, to create a very specific psychological state, a powerful phenomenon it calls the moment. Listen to this definition. It's from an 18th century text, and it's incredible. The moment isn't a choice. It says it's an involuntary state. It's that critical point where the senses just take over, resistance melts away, and a person becomes way more willing than their conscious mind would ever normally allow. So when you boil it all down, both the hot and the cool methods, they're basically a form of hypnotism. The goal is to focus the target's mind so intensely on you, your voice, your glance, your very presence, that the rest of the world, with all its worries and distractions, just fades away. In fact, the source breaks this down into a kind of four-step process. First, you focus their mind with your intense, undistracted attention. Then, step 2, you start to awaken their senses through things like glances, scent, maybe an accidental touch. Third, and this is so critical, you learn to read the signs that it's working. And finally, you apply just a little bit of pressure to help them get totally lost in that state, where only the present moment exists. So what are those signs? Well, they're the involuntary physical tells. The things you can't fake, right? That show the analytical mind is starting to relax its grip. Things like blushing, a little tremor in the voice, or when they unconsciously start mirroring your body language, these are all clues that someone is entering the moment. And the source gives us this really powerful metaphor to wrap our heads around this feeling: a raft. It is the perfect symbol for this whole process. It's about cutting someone loose from their anchors, their past, their future, their worries, and just letting them drift with you on a current of pure sensation. And this quote from Linda Christian, who was one of Flynn's conquests, just captures that feeling perfectly. It's not about force, it's about being gently guided into this state of surrender. The feeling is one of being led, not pushed. And all of this, it really leads us to a fascinating final question, especially for us today. As our lives become more and more digital, more disconnected from our actual bodies, does this kind of focused physical attention become an even rarer, and because of that, maybe an even more powerful lure than it ever was before? Something to think about. All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something really interesting from our source material, the art of the bold move. So let me just start with a provocative question. What if being kind, what if being chivalrous, is sometimes the wrong move? The source material we're looking at today suggests that there are moments where politeness just doesn't cut it, and something more decisive is needed. Yeah, that's the core idea right there. The argument is that sometimes you gotta throw all that aside and just overwhelm. Don't give the other person time to think. And to really see how this plays out, the source gives us this fascinating case study. Okay, so to really get this, we're gonna look at a classic literary example from the novel Dangerous Liaisons. It's all about this calculated pursuit of the super virtuous President de Tourvel by this notorious guy, the Vicomte de Valmont. Now, just a heads up, this is an analysis of a very specific, kind of old school social strategy, but it's perfect for illustrating the psychology behind the bold move. So you gotta understand that Valmont's strategy wasn't just one single action. No, it was this long, drawn-out campaign built on patience and serious psychological pressure. Look at this timeline. Phase 1, he confesses his love, but then, get this, he immediately retreats and starts this letter-writing blitz. Then in Phase 2, he comes back, but he keeps his distance, building up this false sense of security, playing the friend card. In Phase 3, just when she's about to give in, he pulls back again, which totally confuses her and makes her run. And then Phase 4 is just brilliant. He fakes this public love sickness, knowing it'll get back to her. All of this, every single step is building up to that one final moment in Phase 5, the decisive confrontation. So after weeks of this push and pull, this cat and mouse game, he sets the stage for the final scene. It's this moment of just intense emotional chaos. He's mixing harsh words with these passionate declarations of love, and it leaves Tourvel completely spun out, totally disoriented and vulnerable. And that's when he makes his move. He literally just picks her up, overwhelms her, and boom. All that resistance she's had for weeks, it just crumbles. She surrenders completely with these words. It just goes to show you the incredible power of that final climactic move after such a long, calculated buildup. So let's break down why on earth this actually worked. All right, so what was the magic here? Why did this work so well? Well, the source argues it had nothing to do with physical force. It was all about a really, really deep understanding of human psychology. And what's so wild is how you can break this whole complex seduction down into a clear 5-step process. Step 1 is all about piquing her curiosity. He uses his bad boy reputation to make her want to fix him. Then step 2, he feeds her vanity with this incredibly patient, passionate pursuit. For step 3, he builds this false sense of security by backing off at just the right moments. And that sets up the kill shot in step 4, creating massive emotional tension by mixing all these signals, kindness, cruelty, you name it. And only then, when she is at her absolute most confused, does he go for step 5 and strike. And this right here is the absolute key point. Indifference is your enemy. Her resistance, her struggle, according to this theory, that wasn't a no. Not at all. It was proof that she was emotionally hooked. And that's what made the final surrender feel like a release, not a defeat. You know, the source even pulls this amazing quote from another character in the book, and it argues that the bold move works because it gives the other person a convenient excuse. It lets them surrender while saving face, right? They get to tell themselves they were taken by storm instead of admitting they wanted to give in all along. Okay, so moving beyond the specific kind of dramatic story, the source then boils this whole strategy down into a set of universal principles for overcoming hesitation in general. So the analysis makes this super sharp distinction between being timid and being bold. Think about it. Timidity comes across as totally self-absorbed. You're just worried about how you look, and that creates all this doubt and awkwardness. But boldness, that's focused completely on the other person. It sends the signal that you are so overwhelmed by them that you just have to act. And that is way more exciting, way more flattering. So the source lays out these tactical keys. And look, it's not about being some kind of aggressive jerk. It's about being attentive and then being decisive. You got to read the signs, right? You use the element of surprise. And crucial point, you can't wait so long that they start to doubt if you even want them. The goal is to create this big, memorable, almost theatrical moment where your own intense emotion just becomes totally contagious. And get this, the source even goes way back to the Roman poet Ovid to back this up. The point is, hesitating after you've gotten a clear signal isn't seen as being polite, it's seen as a lack of courage. I mean, as Ovid puts it, if you hesitate at that moment, you deserve to lose everything you've gained. Wow. Okay, so let's pull all this together. What's the underlying theory here? According to the source, why is boldness so powerful? This is really the heart of it. The source argues that the bold move isn't actually about domination. It's about providing a release. The idea is that it lets the other person finally stop fighting with themselves, to just let go of this long, exhausting internal struggle. And in that view, the pleasure of surrendering can actually be way bigger than the pleasure of winning, because all that tension is finally resolved. And this metaphor they use is just perfect. The summer storm. Think about it. The whole long campaign is like this oppressive, hot, humid summer day where the tension just builds and builds. So the bold move, that final action, it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like that long-awaited thunderstorm that finally breaks the heat. It's sudden, it's exciting, and man, is it a welcome relief. So, in the end, the source leaves us with this big question. In our world, which is so built on politeness and caution, have we maybe lost the art of boldness? Is it a lost tool for creating real excitement, real connection? It really makes you wonder, right? What moments are we all missing out on because we choose to be timid instead? We all love talking about the art of seduction, right? The chase, the mystery, the conquest. But what happens the moment after you actually succeed? Well, that's where the real danger and the true art really begins. So, you did it. The chase is over. The tension's released. You've won. So why on earth is this the most dangerous moment of all? It's because the one thing that created all that magic, the pursuit itself, is now gone. And what you choose to fill that space with determines everything. Let's get right into it. The danger is baked right into success itself. See, those intense emotional highs you feel during a seduction, they create their own kind of gravity. And what goes up, well, it has to come down. often it swings way back in the opposite direction. Think about it. You've hit the peak of excitement, and all that delicious tension is finally released. But that release creates a vacuum, and what rushes in to fill it is often a valley of disappointment, boredom, even a little distrust. The energy that fueled the entire chase just vanishes, and it leaves a void for both of you. And this is where we get to the heart of the matter, the breaking of the spell. Seduction is a kind of enchantment, isn't it? You're not quite your normal self. You're this heightened, idealized version. You've created a fantasy. But here's the thing. No spell lasts forever on its own. The source material has this perfect word for it, disenchantment. And the metaphor it uses is just brilliant. It describes disenchantment as being like a drug wearing off. During the seduction, you're both high on the fantasy. Afterwards, reality crashes back in. And suddenly you see the other person, and hey, even yourself, in a much harsher, more ordinary light. And this just lays it all out, doesn't it? During the seduction, everything is fantasy. Your presence is heightened. There's mystery, suspense. You're seeing an idealized partner, and the tension is absolutely electric. But then, the aftermath. Reality. You go back to being your normal self. Flaws and insecurities creep in. The ideal becomes just a real person. And that high energy, it just plummets. This is the exact moment the spell shatters. So here you are, at a crossroads. And this isn't something you can just let drift. It demands a conscious choice, a strategic one. Do you end the connection cleanly, preserving the magic of what it was? Or do you try to continue it to transform that initial spark into a lasting flame? Both paths require a very clear strategy. All right, let's look at the first option, the clean break. Now, this might sound cold, but this source makes a powerful argument that a swift, decisive ending, what it calls a sacrifice, is often the most compassionate choice. It prevents that slow, painful, drawn-out burnout we all dread. The tactics here are pretty direct. Avoid the slow fade, end it fast, and don't apologize. That often just adds insult to injury. But what if they won't let go? Well, this is where it gets really clever. You deliberately break the spell yourself. How? By suffocating them with boring, monotonous, clinging affection. You kill the very mystery that attracted them in the first place. The classic example of this is the Marquise de Mertoul from Dangerous Liaisons. She got tired of her lover, but she found that being cold and distant only made him try harder. So what did she do? She flipped the script completely. She showered him with constant, possessive, round-the-clock affection. Suddenly there was no space, no fantasy, no mystery, and he got bored and left her. It was a perfectly executed, deliberate disenchantment. Okay, but what if you don't want to end it? What if you want to keep that fire going? Well, that brings us to path 2, the second seduction. And this isn't about just coasting on your early success. Oh no, this is about actively fighting against that slide into boring familiarity and keeping the initial magic alive. This requires a whole new strategy. First, you have to constantly fight against inertia and routine. Don't let things get too comfortable. Second, you have to maintain a bit of mystery and distance. Remember, familiarity is the enemy of desire. Third, and I know this one sounds crazy, you strategically inject a little pain or conflict to keep things interesting. And finally, you keep the spirit of the whole thing light and playful. Never forget that seduction is a game. You know, this isn't some new idea. The Roman poet Ovid understood this perfectly 2,000 years ago. He wrote, "To guard a conquest as tricky as making it." I mean, just think about that. Keeping someone's desire takes just as much skill, art, and effort as it took to capture it in the first place. The work is never really done. Take Nell Gwyn, the mistress of King Charles II. Now, this was a king who got bored of everything. So instead of becoming possessive or demanding, Nell made every moment with him an entertainment. She was an endless source of wit and surprise. By giving him infinite variety, she made sure he could never, ever take her for granted. It was a continuous, masterful second seduction. For a more, shall we say, intense example, look at D.H. Lawrence and his wife Frida. He knew she was bored with her comfortable life, so he gave her the exact opposite: constant drama, hardship, and adventure. Their fights were legendary, sure, but so was their passion. By constantly injecting conflict and challenge, he kept their relationship from ever going stale. And if you want to see this on a grand national scale, I mean, reseducing an entire country? Look no further than Napoleon's return from exile. France had grown tired of him, but after a year with a boring king, they were disenchanted with their new reality. So Napoleon staged the most masterful comeback. It was pure theater. He revived old symbols, he acted with incredible courage, and he created this irresistible drama. He reseduced the entire nation and took back his empire without firing a single bullet. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, whether you choose the clean break or the second seduction, the key is conscious, strategic action. You have to understand that desire is not self-sustaining. It's like a fire that you have to actively tend to. And this quote from the source material just says it all perfectly. Passion does not sustain itself. Left to themselves, the embers will slowly die out. To bring that passion back to life, you have to fan it, you have to stoke it. It requires your constant attention and vigilance. You either douse the fire deliberately or you work to keep it ablaze. There's really no in-between. And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to think about. In our search for security and stability in relationships, are we accidentally killing the very things that create passion in the first place? You know, the mystery, the tension, a little bit of anxiety. Is comfort, in the end, the true enemy of desire?
Hey, so let me ask you something. Have you ever had an experience that was so captivating, so all-consuming, that the real world just kind of melted away? Well, today we're diving into the architecture of those moments. We're going to look at how certain places and certain experiences are actually designed to pull us out of our everyday lives and drop us right into a world of fantasy and play. I mean, it's a feeling we all know, right? That weight of routine, the endless to-do lists, work, responsibilities. It can get pretty heavy. But this craving we have for escape, it's not just some modern problem. It's a really deep human need. And people throughout history have found some pretty fascinating ways to satisfy it.
So just imagine for a second, a life that's almost entirely dominated by work. One day just blends into the next. For a long, long time, that was just life for most people. But cultures came up with this brilliant antidote, the festival. You know, think of something like the Roman Saturnalia or the old Maypole festivals in Europe. These weren't just parties. No, they were these sanctioned moments of escape where the whole community could just hit a giant pause button on reality all together.
And this, right here, is the absolute key. During a festival, you were basically given permission to be someone else. That mask you wore, it wasn't just a costume. It was like a psychological permission slip to just let go of your normal identity, your duties, all your inhibitions. It was a temporary transformation, but a really profound one.
This whole idea actually has a name. We can call it festival time. And it's so much more than just taking a break from the usual grind. It's about deliberately building an alternate reality. You can think of it like this bubble, this little world that's created to be the polar opposite of everyday life, a place with a totally different set of rules.
And this is where you can really see the difference. I mean, look at this. On one side, you've got daily life, routine, responsibility, predictability, the cycle of work and rest. But then you step into festival time and everything gets flipped on its head. Routine becomes play, responsibility becomes freedom. Predictability? No way! It's all about fantasy. And that simple rhythm of work and rest gets replaced by these big, unforgettable, dramatic moments. It's a world that is literally engineered for pleasure.
And that's why this is so relevant right now. Our modern culture, for the most part, has kind of lost these built-in collective moments of release. And the argument here is that this has left a kind of void, a deep, maybe unconscious yearning for experiences that can just transport us somewhere else.
Okay, so if we're all missing this festival time, how do you actually create it? Well, it turns out there's a kind of recipe. The source material breaks it all down into a framework of 6 key ingredients for building these intoxicating, separate worlds that just pull people right in. So, first up, you need theatrical effects. You're creating an illusion, making people feel like they've stepped onto a stage. Then you layer in the visuals of pleasure, glittering surfaces, mirrors, soft lighting, things that signal a break from the ordinary. Next, you use crowds or closeness to raise what you could call the psychological temperature, creating this shared infectious energy. A little touch of the mystical, like exotic music or incense, helps short-circuit our rational minds. Then you want to distort their sense of time, making hours just fly by in a happy frenzy. And finally, you have to create moments, those dramatic peaks of pleasure that people will remember forever.
So that's the recipe. But how does it work in the real world? I mean, theory is one thing, but these principles have been used masterfully throughout history. Let's take a look at 3 amazing case studies that really bring this to life.
First, we're going to travel to 18th century Osaka, Japan, to a district they called the Ukiyo, or the floating world. Now, this wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a whole separate reality.
It was a world completely dedicated to the art of pleasure, where the super strict social rules of the time were just thrown out the window.
And you can see every single one of those ingredients we talked about. The streets were basically a stage, filled with actors and incredible visuals. The social rules were turned upside down. The energy from the crowds was contagious. And for the young men who went there, time and money just seemed to dissolve. It was designed to be an addictive escape.
All right, let's jump forward a couple hundred years to a more modern example. Andy Warhol's factory in 1960s New York. Warhol didn't just make art there, he curated an entire environment. It was an ongoing performance, an endless party that became this legendary escape for artists, socialites, and anyone who felt like they didn't fit in.
The factory was just a perfect modern festival space. The whole place was shimmering, covered in silver. It was crowded, it was theatrical, and it was all governed by one simple rule. Seriousness was out, and playfulness was everything. You weren't just going to a party, you were stepping onto a movie set where you could totally reinvent yourself and become a star in Warhol's strange and beautiful universe.
So, for our last example, let's zoom in and see how this can be created on a really personal scale. The famous seducer Casanova, well, he didn't need a whole building. He himself was the festival time for the women he courted. He could craft a perfect, temporary fantasy world just for them.
Casanova was an absolute master of this. He would create one dramatic moment after another, focusing all his energy on his target. He'd dress theatrically, always covered in jewels. He'd fill their days with so many activities, carnivals, plays, balls, that time itself would just seem to bend and fly by. And by offering a mask, sometimes literally, he gave them permission to be playful, to be bold, creating a fantasy so intense it would leave a mark on them forever. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it's not just about throwing a great party or being charming. It's about tapping into a really deep psychological need that we all share, the need for transformation, for a real escape from the day-to-day.
So, seduction in this context isn't really what you might think. It's about the process of creating a concentrated, psychological, floating world for someone else. It's about making them feel so different, so free, when they're with you, that they actually feel an inner change. You're not just showing them a good time, you're offering them the chance to be a different version of themselves.
And this right here is the ultimate effect. The real power is in the contrast. When the festival is over, when that person leaves your special world and goes back to their normal routine, the grayness of reality hits even harder. And that's when the craving starts. The deep desire to come back to that other, more magical world that you created.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question to think about. In our modern world, which is so often filled with routine and demands, where do we find our festival time? Is it in art, in travel, in the communities we build, or is it something we have to learn to create for ourselves and for each other? Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, let's pull back the curtain on something that is shaping our world pretty much every single day, the art of soft seduction. It's one of the most powerful forms of influence out there, and you're about to see exactly how it works.
I mean, really think about it for a second. Have you ever had that sudden urge to buy something you just saw in a movie? Or that feeling that a certain politician just seems trustworthy, even if you don't know why? Or maybe you've joined a social trend without a second thought? It always feels like it was our own idea, right? But what if it wasn't? What if there's a much more subtle force at play here?
Well, that force has a name: soft seduction. And honestly, it's the ultimate form of power, because it doesn't rely on force or direct arguments. Instead, it works by making us want to be persuaded. It wraps its message up in something pleasant, something entertaining, which makes us lower our defenses willingly, sometimes even happily.
To really get a grip on this, we've got to understand the two basic ways people try to influence us. It's like a tale of two completely different worlds, the loud versus the quiet, the direct versus the indirect.
So let's look at the contrast here. On one hand, you've got the hard sell. This is what we usually think of as selling, right? It's aggressive, it's full of facts and figures, and it kind of makes us put up this wall of suspicion. But the soft sell, totally different. It doesn't sell you a product, it sells you a feeling, a lifestyle, a mood. It's gentle, it's fun, and it's designed to just slip right past our rational brain.
And you know, this isn't some newfangled marketing trick. This technique was actually perfected centuries ago by the great charlatans of Europe. See, to sell their questionable elixirs, they wouldn't just start with a sales pitch. No way. They'd put on a whole show, music, clowns, all kinds of entertainment.
And once the crowd was laughing and relaxed, then they'd briefly mention their miracle cure. They figured out a timeless truth: pleasure sells way better than proof.
So, how is this actually done in the modern world? Well, it all comes down to a clear, repeatable strategy. Let's break down the playbook. These are the 6 core steps to selling pretty much anything to pretty much anyone.
And this is the blueprint. It lays out 6 key steps, from creating news all the way to shaping someone's identity. Each one is designed to bypass our critical thinking. Now, we're not going to have time to cover every single one, but let's dive into a few of the most powerful tactics.
All right, let's start with the first step, because it's probably the most critical. If you just show up as an advertisement, you're just noise. But if you can manufacture an event that the media covers as news, it instantly gets this layer of reality and credibility. People just pay more attention to news, we trust it more, and that natural skepticism we have towards being sold something, it gets completely bypassed.
The second rule is you never ever lead with a rational argument. You aim for the gut. You stir up basic emotions: patriotism, family, desire, you name it. The whole idea is to surround your message with what you could call emotional magnets. You know, heroes, little kids, even puppies. These things create positive feelings that stick with us long after we've forgotten any of the facts.
And that brings us to rule number 3, and this one is pretty sneaky. It's that the form of your message is more important than the actual content. An audience might think they're listening to the words, but what they're truly absorbing are the visuals, the colors, the movement, the setting. These images are kind of hypnotic. They get under your skin, and that makes it much, much harder to think critically about what's actually being said.
And this quote just illustrates the point perfectly. It actually comes from a White House official talking to a journalist. The journalist had just run a story that was critical of Ronald Reagan, but to make his point, he used the administration's own powerful, positive video footage. The official's response was, well, chillingly simple. He was saying that when compelling visuals conflict with the actual words, the visuals always win. People believe what they see. Now, this isn't just theory. History is absolutely full of masters who have used this playbook to change society, win elections, and sell millions of products. So let's look at a few amazing examples.
You know, the pattern is remarkably consistent, no matter the era or the goal. Whether we're talking about a political myth or a staged news event or just masterful TV visuals, the core principles of soft seduction are always the same.
Take Andrew Jackson. His team crafted this incredibly powerful myth of Old Hickory, the simple man from a log cabin, a man of the people. This image was pure soft seduction. The reality? Jackson was a wealthy, slave-owning plantation owner and a super shrewd political operator. But that myth, it was just so much more appealing and emotionally powerful than the complex truth, and that's what got him elected.
Okay, now for one of the most famous examples in history, and it's all summed up in these 3 powerful words. This phrase didn't just sell a product, it literally changed an entire social norm.
This was the brilliant work of Edward Bernays, who's basically the father of public relations. He was hired by a tobacco company, and his goal was to break the taboo against women smoking in public. Now, he didn't run an ad. Instead, he staged an event. He hired these fashionable socialites to march in the New York City Easter Parade, all while smoking cigarettes as a protest for women's rights. He called them their torches of freedom. The media covered it as a news story about feminism, not a PR stunt. And just like that, a new social trend was born, literally overnight.
And that's really the core of it all, isn't it? Masters like Bernays, or this other movie publicist Terry Reichenbach, who used to stage fake diplomatic missions to promote films, they all understood this one principle. They created this perfect blend of real life and fiction. It feels real enough to be believable, but it's cinematic enough to be exciting. And that right there, that's the seductive sweet spot.
So, we've seen the playbook, we've seen the players, but let's bring this all home. Why is understanding all of this so crucial for us today?
Here's the key takeaway. Soft seduction works because it never announces itself. It's like a Trojan horse. It disguises its real goal, which is to sell you an idea or a product, by offering up something we all want: entertainment, pleasure, a sense of belonging. It speaks to our desires, not our intellect.
And that leads us to the final and most critical question. The techniques of that 17th century charlatan and the 20th century PR genius, they're all around us, and they're more sophisticated than ever. You see it in social media trends, political campaigns, the branding of everyday products. So now that you can see the playbook, the real question is, who's using it on you?